I was supposed to be buying a cabin that week. Not anything fancy. Just a quiet place by the lake up near Hocking Hills. Mary and I used to drive past it every fall. She always said, "That porch looks like the kind of place we'd grow old on." She never got the chance. Cancer doesn't wait. But I had planned to buy that cabin. After 40 years at the power company, rain, wind, double shifts, holidays missed, I had finally retired. A modest pension, some savings, and a retirement fund I'd built slow and steady, like everything else in my life. Brian said he could grow it. Said leaving it in an old IRA was letting it rot. "Heck, Dad, you trust the utility company but not your own son," he laughed, sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, latte in hand. "Let me invest it. I know what I'm doing." I did trust him. I wanted to. That was my mistake. So I handed over the access. The whole $300,000. Signed the papers. Didn't ask too many questions. He said it was being aggressively diversified. I didn't know what that meant, but I figured he did. 2 years passed. I saw the signs, in hindsight. The new SUV in his driveway. The kitchen remodel. The trip to Key West. Kelsey started wearing designer bags, and they joked about how stressed they were while planning Lena's Disneyland birthday. I kept quiet. I didn't want to be the old man who couldn't understand modern finance. I trusted. Then last March, I saw a for sale sign go up on the cabin. It stirred something in me. The memory of Mary in her scarf, sipping cider in the passenger seat, pointing at that porch and saying, "That one. Someday." I called Brian that night. "Hey, bud. I think I'm ready to cash out," I said. "Found something I want to buy." There was a pause on the line. Not long. Just long enough to know everything had gone wrong. "Dad," he said, his voice tight. "The market's been crazy. It's not a good time. We should let it ride." I sat in my chair, the one with the worn arms and the tiny tear Mary had sewn shut 3 times. "How much is left, Brian?" Another pause. "I mean, it's volatile. But I'm watching it closely." "How much is left?" I asked again. He finally said it. Like he was spitting out spoiled milk. "Dad, it's gone. Not a dime. Not a nickel." He hadn't just lost it. He'd used it. Moved it around. Dipped into it. Short-term loans, he called them. Just temporary cash flow problems. "I was going to tell you," he said. "Once it rebounded. I was trying to protect you." I hung up. That night, I sat at the same table where I'd signed the papers 2 years earlier. Only this time, there was no coffee. No laughter. Just silence. I looked around my house. Every wall had a photo, every drawer had a memory, every corner held something Mary touched. And I realized, he hadn't just taken my money. He had stolen the final chapter one had written with my own hands. But I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to wait. And then I was going to rewrite the ending. I met Mary in 1977 at a VFW dance in Springfield. She wore red, bold and bright like she knew it would wreck a man's attention. She wasn't loud, but when she laughed, people turned. I was 27 and wore a borrowed tie. I had grease under my nails from fixing a transformer that morning. She still danced with me. Said I reminded her of someone honest. We married a year later, in a courthouse with more nerves than guests. Bought a little house in a modest neighborhood just outside Cincinnati, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a yard barely big enough to mow. It was a starter home, but we never left. Turned out, starting was all we ever needed. That house held 42 Thanksgivings, 3 pets, 2 miscarriages, and a whole lot of forgiveness. I worked as a lineman for Ohio Edison. Dangerous work, but steady. Climbing poles in the rain. Restoring power in snowstorms. I worked Christmas Eve 3 years straight. Missed birthdays, anniversaries. But every paycheck, I'd set a little aside. My retirement fund grew slow. The old-fashioned way. Steady contributions, low-risk funds. Never flashy, never skipped. Mary made the place feel warm. She painted the kitchen 3 times in our first 5 years. She grew tomatoes even though the deer always got them first. She left notes in my lunchbox, even after decades. You make coming home worth it. We wanted kids but waited until it felt stable. Brian came along in '84. Bright, talkative, always quick to negotiate bedtime. From the beginning, he wasn't like me. He asked why before he did anything. Loved games with rules he could bend. I coached his little league team. Taught him how to drive in my old F-150. Paid for most of his college tuition out of saved overtime, even when it meant pushing off the new roof another year. He majored in finance. Money makes the world turn, Dad, he once told me, grinning. Not elbow grease. I laughed, not knowing I was already losing him. When Mary got sick, Brian barely called. Said he was swamped with client portfolios. Kelsey, his wife, sent a card. They came for the funeral, posed for photos, then left before dessert. I washed the dishes alone that night. I should have seen the change then. But I didn't. I thought, grief makes people selfish. After Mary passed, I poured myself into simple routines. Grocery Tuesdays. Church Thursdays. I kept her side of the bed made. I visited the plot twice a month, always with fresh mums. Brian started calling again 6 months later. Friendly. Chatty. Told me how hot the markets were, how stupid it was to let money die in an IRA. Dad, he said, if you trust anyone, trust your own son. He offered to manage my retirement. Said he'd grow it. Said I deserved better. I didn't question. I wanted to believe we were healing. That he wanted to care for me, like I'd cared for him. So I handed him the keys. Not just to my money, but to the last thing I had built with quiet patience. The future I had carved from overtime and leftovers. And for a while, I let myself believe I was finally being repaid. I had no idea I was giving him the match to burn it all down. It started with silence. When I told Brian I was ready to cash out, ready to buy that cabin Mary and I had always dreamed about, he hesitated. Now's not the time, Dad, he said. The market's volatile. Let's give it a few more months. Something tightened in my chest. Not panic. Recognition. Like realizing the foundation under your house has been cracking for years, you just didn't hear it until now. I asked for numbers. A statement. Anything. That's when he stopped responding to texts. A week later, I showed up at his house unannounced. Kelsey opened the door, dressed in yoga pants and holding a green juice. Her smile was tight. Oh. Frank. We weren't expecting you. I'm here for Brian. He's on a call. I'll wait. She didn't invite me in. Just stood there, half blocking the entry, glancing behind her like I was a problem she didn't want the neighbors to see. Brian eventually came out, phone still pressed to his ear. He gave me a quick nod and finished his call in the driveway. We should talk, I said. Not a great time, Dad. Can I call you later? No. Now. He sighed, pulled me into the garage like we were co-conspirators instead of father and son. I know what you're going to ask, he said. And I need you to trust me. It's not as bad as it looks. Then show me, I said. Show me the account. The balance. He looked everywhere but my face. I moved some funds around. Things dipped. But we're positioned to bounce back. How much is left? He rubbed the back of his neck. Right now? Not much. I stared at him, waiting. I was trying to get ahead, he said. I had an opportunity with a friend's tech fund. We were going to triple it. Then the market shifted. I had to pull some of it to cover margin calls. Then, some other stuff. What other stuff? He shrugged. House repairs. Expenses. You know how it is. My hands shook, not from rage, but from clarity. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a bad quarter. He had spent it. All of it. You didn't lose it, Brian. You used it. It wasn't like that, Dad. I meant to pay it back. I was going to surprise you. I took a step back. The garage smelled like fertilizer and car wax. It made me nauseous. I trusted you, I said. That money wasn't for surprise trips or Tesla stocks. That was my life's work. Don't be dramatic. I turned and left without another word. The next day, I got a text from Kelsey, Brian is trying his best. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder than it needs to be. That night, I pulled out every document I had. The original account numbers. The signed forms. My pension stub. And I sat there until 2 a.m., realizing that nothing, not a penny, could be recovered. No police report. No lawsuit. Just paperwork and betrayal. Brian didn't just break my trust. He stole something sacred, the dignity of rest after decades of labor. And now, while he tucked his daughter into a bed I helped pay for, I stared at a future emptied by the very hands I once held in protection. It wasn't rage I felt. It was resolve. And I knew, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't threaten. But I would take something back. Bit by bit. Quietly. The first morning after I found out, I still made coffee. Poured it into the same chipped mug Mary gave me for our 20th anniversary. World's okayest husband, it said. She'd laughed when she gave it to me. I never stopped using it. But the coffee tasted wrong. Bitter, though I hadn't changed anything. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wood grain. Watched sunlight crawl across it like time itself was trying to pass unnoticed. I didn't cry. That would have felt too much like resolution. Instead, I just existed. Breathing, blinking, waiting for something inside me to catch up to the truth. I'd worked since I was 16. Paper routes. Warehouse shifts. Then decades of rain-slick power lines and burning summers spent in bucket trucks. All of it had pointed to one thing, retirement. Rest. A soft landing. And now it was gone. I tried going through the motions. Grocery shopping. Walking the neighborhood. Saying hello to neighbors who didn't know they were waving at a man who had just lost everything he thought he'd earned. They asked about Lena. How's your granddaughter? I nodded and said, growing fast. I didn't mention that the last time I saw her, she was asking Alexa to play songs I didn't recognize. I started forgetting little things. Where I'd put my keys. Whether I'd eaten. I left the stove on once. Not long, but long enough to scare me. I stopped watching baseball. Stopped calling my friend Ted on Thursdays. Even the birds stopped coming to the feeder outside the kitchen window. Or maybe I just stopped noticing them. Brian didn't call. Kelsey sent a text a week later, we'd love to have you over for dinner soon. Let's talk about what's next. What's next? As if we were planning a vacation and not dealing with the quiet murder of trust. I didn't answer. The thing about emotional collapse is that it doesn't look like drama. It's not shouting or broken dishes. It's standing in your own house and realizing it no longer feels like home. I thought about selling the place. Starting over somewhere. But even that felt pointless. I didn't want new. I wanted the life I was promised. The one I built with careful hands and good intentions. For weeks, I avoided the corner drawer, the one with the cabin brochures. When I finally opened it, I didn't cry. I just stared at the faded paper, the curling edges, the handwritten note from Mary, for someday. And I whispered, I'm sorry. Not to her. Not really. But to the man I used to be. The one who thought he could retire in peace. I was hollow. Not broken. Not angry. Just emptied. But even an empty vessel makes a sound when you tap it. And that's when I realized, I wasn't done. Not yet. The change didn't come like thunder. It came quietly, like the sound of a drawer being opened with purpose. I sat down at the kitchen table one morning, opened a blank notebook, and wrote 3 words, plan. Don't beg. That was the line. The new boundary. I wasn't going to ask for the money back. I wasn't going to sit across from Brian and let him offer me empty apologies in between bites of a steak I probably paid for. I was going to move like they had, quietly, confidently, and without guilt. I started small. Called the bank, asked about the status of the house deed. It was still in my name, of course. I never thought to change it. But now it meant something different. It meant I still had leverage, something they hadn't stolen. Next, I revisited the pension. It wasn't huge, but it was still coming in monthly. Enough to start building something. Not a cabin, not yet, but a future. I cancelled the credit card I had co-signed for Brian 6 years ago. No warning. Just a letter and a quiet breath after it was done. I contacted my old union buddy, Mike, who'd gone into contracting. Told him I had time on my hands and hands that still knew how to work. He offered part-time hours doing light site inspections. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. I sold the riding mower. Hired a neighbor's kid to handle the lawn. Then I sold the boat trailer I hadn't used in 5 years. Every dollar went into a separate savings account, one they didn't know about. At night, I read. Not just novels. Books on trust law. Financial independence. Wills. I made notes. Drew arrows. Highlighted phrases. I learned how to make what little I had impossible to touch without consent. I didn't tell anyone. Not Ted, not the neighbor, not even the mailman I always joked with. It wasn't secrecy. It was sovereignty. I saw Brian 2 weeks later at the grocery store. He waved from across the produce section, pushing a cart with almond milk and brand-name cereal. I nodded. Just once. And kept walking. The next day, I got a text, everything okay? I didn't reply. He was beginning to feel the shift. And I was beginning to remember who I was before I gave it all away. Not angry. Not vengeful. Just awake. Revenge didn't look like fire. It looked like paperwork. I began with my will. I rewrote it, word by word, sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen Mary once used to sign birthday cards. I named no beneficiaries. Instead, I set up a trust. One that would fund scholarships for trade school students, linemen, welders, builders. Kids like I used to be. Brian's name was removed. Kelsey's too. Lena. I left the option open. Not as punishment, but as potential. A clause, if she came to see me once a year until she turned 18, she'd receive a small bond when she turned 25. No strings. Just roots. Then I looked at the house. It was paid off. Brian had assumed he'd inherit it, eventually. He told me once over a beer, laughing, one day we'll turn this into a rental property. Passive income, right? So I didn't sell it. I donated it. Found a small nonprofit that provided transitional housing for retired veterans. They needed space. I had it. The transfer was quiet. Legal. Final. I arranged to live out my days in the guest room rent-free in exchange for part-time handyman work. I emptied the house room by room. Gave away the furniture. Took down the photos. Boxed up memories. The walls echoed like they hadn't in decades. When I was done, I left a single note taped to the refrigerator: "Gone fishing, for good." I changed my phone number. Started fresh. Got a P.O. box. I gave my address only to people who showed up. Not to those who asked. Brian tried calling. Then texting. Then emailing. "We're worried about you. Please respond. Did you move? Eventually, we need to talk about the house." I didn't answer. He drove by twice, according to Ted. Saw the for lease sign. Must have thought it was a joke. It wasn't. I started walking each morning. Same route, new rhythm. Past the bakery where Mary used to buy cinnamon rolls. Sat on the bench outside the library. Sometimes I'd hear kids laughing, see couples walking dogs, feel the breeze through cottonwood trees. Peace has a sound. You don't notice it until everything else stops. I volunteered at the community center on Tuesdays. Read aloud to seniors on Fridays. Helped a neighbor fix a porch railing on a rainy Sunday. People started knowing my name, not for what I lost, but for what I gave. And every time I got a call from an unknown number, I smiled and let it ring. This wasn't revenge made of fury. This was a life remade. And they weren't part of it. The first real ripple came from Kelsey. She showed up at my old house one afternoon, heels clicking on the front steps, only to be met by a veteran in his 60s who was rebuilding his life one room at a time. She asked for me, and he pointed to the new office of the nonprofit. She never went in. Just turned around, lips pursed like someone had swapped her credit card with a declined one. That night, I received an email from her: "This isn't how family handles things. You embarrassed us." I deleted it without opening. Then came the storm of social ripples. Mutual friends asked, gently, if something had happened. Brian's LinkedIn quietly removed the reference to family wealth management. Kelsey's Instagram posts shifted from champagne brunches to passive-aggressive quotes about overcoming betrayal. I said nothing. But I watched. Brian's business hit a snag. Turns out, some of his clients, ones he'd talked about during barbecues, had started asking questions. My name came up in circles he hadn't expected. One even contacted me privately, asking if I'd really entrusted him with my funds. I did, I said. Once. The next week, Brian's firm's site went offline. Then back up. Then down again. A month later, Ted called. "Your son's been asking about legal options," he said. "Something about unfair will changes." There was nothing unfair. Just unexpected. Lena's school sent out a funding letter for extracurriculars. Kelsey posted a link, asking for donations to support Lena's educational dreams. I donated anonymously under the name, Someday Cabin Fund. Just enough to make her pause. Brian sent a handwritten letter. Not an apology. A pitch. If we work together, maybe we can rebuild something. We're still family. I placed the letter in the fireplace and watched the flame curl it to ash. They lost more than money. They lost the map. The one that used to point them toward holidays, support, memories. And they didn't even notice the path disappearing until they stood alone on it. Sometimes consequences don't knock. They arrive in silence. In the absence of connection. In the echo of a phone that never rings back. They'd thought I'd always be there. Now they weren't sure where there even was. Peace didn't announce itself. It slipped in like morning light under a weathered curtain. It began in the quiet. In the way the air felt still before coffee. In how my breath no longer caught halfway through a memory. I started sleeping better. The night stopped dragging. I didn't reach for the light every hour, and when I woke, it was because the sun asked me to, not my regrets. The room I stayed in, just off the side hallway of the non-profit housing, was small but warm. One shelf, one lamp, and one old rocking chair I refinished myself. There was a sense of rightness in its simplicity. Mary's photo sat on the nightstand, beside the only thing I'd taken from the old house, her recipe for cornbread, handwritten in fading blue ink. I got back into the rhythm of work, not the kind that drained, but the kind that gives shape to the day. I fixed leaky faucets. Rewired broken outlets. Repaired steps that had caved from time and neglect. I kept my hands busy. In doing so, my mind began to quiet. People started to know me, not as Brian's father, or that guy who used to live on Vine Street, but just Frank. Mr. D, to some of the kids. The one who showed up early and left late. The man who listened more than he spoke. I joined a walking group. 3 of us, all widowers. We didn't talk much on those walks, but we didn't need to. There was comfort in the crunch of gravel underfoot and the hush of leaves overhead. We passed the same bakery every Wednesday and stopped for 1 cup of black coffee each. It became a ritual I looked forward to. Once a week, I'd drive past the lake cabin Mary and I had once hoped for. I didn't stop anymore. I just nodded as I passed. The swing on the porch was new, but the quiet looked the same. Someone else's dream lived there now, and that was all right. I started teaching twice a month instead of once. Electrical basics, tool care, how to stay safe when working alone. I watched these young men and women find purpose in skills that had once saved me. Jeremy, the boy who called me Mr. D, got his first apprenticeship. When he told me, he hugged me tight and whispered, "You changed my whole life." I cried after he left. Not out of sadness. But because something inside had finally released. Brian hadn't called again. No emails. No birthday cards. And I realized I didn't miss them. What I missed had never truly been them. It had been the idea of who they could have been. Who I had believed they might be. I forgave them in pieces, quietly, like you forgive a storm for knocking down your fence. It wasn't personal. Just destructive. Lena's drawing stayed pinned on the bulletin board beside my bed. It was faded now. The corners curled. Still, I saw it every morning. I wondered what kind of woman she'd grow up to be, and if she'd ever wonder about me. Maybe one day, she'd come find me. Maybe not. Either way, I had left a door open. I began to plant again. Just 1 pot of basil. Then tomatoes. Then sunflowers along the community center fence. A woman named June taught me how to compost. Said, if the earth can start fresh, so can we. Peace didn't look like joy. It looked like steadiness. Like knowing where your socks are. Like remembering your own name without bitterness. I wasn't seeking a happy ending anymore. I was just living in the middle of a quiet chapter, and it felt enough. And enough, I had learned, was a kind of abundance all its own. Some endings don't roar, they rest. Not with vengeance or applause, but with the soft click of a light switch at night, and the peace of knowing it was your hand that turned it off. I lived a life full of hard work, deeper sacrifice, and quieter love than most will ever notice. I was stolen from, but I was never broken. I was forgotten, but I never disappeared. They wrote me off. I rewrote myself. And in the quiet after everything was gone, money, legacy, illusion, I found something they couldn't touch. Myself. And I was enough.